Yeah, I find that too. Just, having people involved in the process, um, it just, yeah, it helps produce something that I think, really resonates with hopefully more than just yourself, but, lots of other people too.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Are you planning to travel with your group sometime soon? If so, please consider my sponsor, Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. With a former educator as its CEO, Kaleidoscope Adventures is dedicated to changing student lives through travel, and they offer high-quality service and an attention to detail that comes from more than 25 years of student travel experience. Trust Kaleidoscope's outstanding staff to focus on your group's one-of-a-kind adventure so that you can focus on everything else. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Jake Walker and Colin Peters for their contributions to the show, and especially to all of you who are listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, on to my next guest, Steve Danyew. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Mark.
How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well. And I'll say for my listeners that, Steve, you've been very generous with your time, and I want to thank you for that.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Without going into details, of course. So, Steve, tell the listeners about yourself.
I'm Steve Danyew. I'm a composer, and I live in Rochester, New York. I write for wind band, for sure, and definitely one of my favorite genres to write for. I also write for The Voice, art songs, choral music, chamber music, little orchestra. And I also teach a couple of courses at the Eastman School of Music in the Institute for Music Leadership.
Excellent. So, Steve, you're a composer, and we have a lot to talk about as far as that goes. But before we do, can you go back in time and tell the listeners about your origin story? How'd you get started in music when you were growing up?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in a relatively small town in Connecticut and was fortunate that my parents loved music. And so we had music playing in our house all the time. We had a CD changer as soon as you could get one of those, and had a variety of music in the CD changer all the time. So anything from Beethoven to Charlie Parker to Pink Floyd. I grew up on a lot of different kinds of music, and I think that was a great music education for me in the beginning, and a great variety of things to learn from. And we had a piano in the house. My dad plays a little bit of piano. And so as a child, I loved to sit down and just improvise at the piano. And I think that's really where, for me, composing began. And it still begins that way for me. Improvising is a big part of my process. So having a piano in the house was huge. And, I would hum things in my head and in the car, and just loved music. And we had, fortunately, a fourth grade orchestra in my town and fifth grade band. So I started the violin for a year in fourth grade. And then when I got to fifth grade, I began the saxophone, which really became an important part of my musical identity all the way through high school and beyond, and really, connected me to playing in bands, and, was another really big source of music education for me.
So you mentioned that your father was an audiophile, and you had that CD changer. How do you think that eclectic mix of music that you mentioned led to or has influenced your composition?
Yeah, I think, each type of music that I was exposed to classical music, jazz, rock and roll, popular music, film music. My parents love film music, and so we'd watch a lot of movies, and I loved the dramatic elements of film music and the lyricism of it. And so I think all of those things, work their way into a composer's music. I mean, I think that a composer is, in a sense, a funnel, and all of the music that we hear and that we pay attention to and enjoy, it funnels its way through our unique, musicianship and our voice. And what comes out is the result of all those things. So, I think I wouldn't say that my music has, distinct elements of each of those things, but I think they all play into it. A little example is with jazz. Having always loved jazz, there's sonorities like the major 7 chord that I've always loved. And so there's chords in my music that are based on that sonority. And, it doesn't sound like jazz in a particular moment, but it's, that's where it comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that you switched from violin to saxophone. What was your school like as far as junior high and high school? Do you have any teachers that you remember, any inspirational lessons, things that you still carry with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both from middle school and high school, I had fantastic teachers and feel really fortunate for that in the public schools. And my high school band director was Jim Dumas, one of the really influential people that led me into pursuing a life in music, I think. And I remember, one of his mantras for the band was excellence comes to those who seek it. And I think he had sort of adopted that from his high school band director. And so he really, taught me how to focus on becoming the best musician I could, and really just inspired me, and just made me want to be a better musician and pursue that. And so, yeah, in high school, I was playing in the band and jazz band, pit orchestra, marching band, every possible performance opportunity. And I think backing up to middle school, one of the things I remember really distinctly is my middle school jazz band director, Walter Mamlock. He just had a way of teaching improvisation and getting the band swinging that I thought, was great. And there was this blues scale warm up that we did every single rehearsal at the beginning of rehearsal to get the band swinging together and giving everyone the chance to improvise for just 4 beats, just one measure per person. I think it was a really accessible way to introduce improvisation and using the blues scale. And, I thought for years after I started composing that it would be neat to go back and write a piece of music that was based on the blues scale and sort of incorporated those notes. And so that's where my piece Magnolia Star came from, was really that genesis of the blues scale. And I actually have my saxophone right here, so I could, demonstrate that if you'd like.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, for the band directors who are listening who do have kids, and that blues scale you mentioned as a way to kind of get kids into improv. If you want to play that, maybe talk about how that helped you kind of in those early days.
Yeah, and I think the blues scale is great because it has these bluesy notes, and you have this framework to begin with, to improvise. Like use these notes and different combinations and see how you like it, see how it sounds. And I think having that limitation and just, you as a composer know this, like having limitations to work with really actually helps our creativity. So when we begin a piece of music, we need limitations in order to be creative. And I think, so the blues scale does that for, improvising too. It's like, just try these specific notes and start there.
And it becomes part of the everyday routine to improvise. It's not something that's scary for the kids.
Exactly. Yeah. Really low pressure. So this is the exercise. I'll play it for you.
Sure.
Rest. Yeah. So just up the scale, down. So in those rests, again, we'd go around the band and each person would have 4 measures to improvise. So then it would sound like this, the whole band playing. And so just back and forth, and just super fun.
Steve, that's awesome. I think you may be the first guest on my band podcast to play their instrument on the show. So there you go.
Well, I don't play a lot, so hopefully it sounds okay.
I'll do some magic. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, can you do some auto tune or something on that?
No, it was just fine. So yeah, that's a really interesting concept, and you mentioned that it contributed to your composition. And but before we get to that, I'm going to make some of these connections a little bit later. But before we get to that, can we finish your story as a young musician? When did you know that you wanted to be a professional musician?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think it was like late in high school when I think everyone is sort of naturally thinking about, what am I going to do in college and where am I going to go? And I think for me, it felt like at that time, music was really my passion. It was what I cared the most about in terms of what could be a profession for me. And I didn't really know what I would do in music. At that time, I didn't have a composition teacher. I was just composing sort of on the side. So that wasn't really in my career trajectory at that point. But I didn't really see myself being a performer. I didn't really see myself being like a full-time teacher either. So it was kind of nebulous, what I would do in music, but I did feel like this is what I feel like I need to pursue. And so I think that, sort of junior, senior year time in high school was when I started to figure that out.
When you did make the decision that you were going to be a musician, what were your college choices and where did you end up going?
Yeah, I ended up going to the University of Miami in Florida. And, looking back, it seems like that was quite a ways from Connecticut where I grew up. But I had and still do have an aunt and uncle who live in Miami who both went to the University of Miami. So I felt like I had that connection and that support down there in Miami. So, for me, I was considering a couple other schools, but Miami was really the place I wanted to go. And I think because it had the combination of, a good music school and it had a music business program. And so, like I said, my senior year in high school, not really knowing exactly what I wanted to do in music, I thought, why don't I go and do, a program like music business that maybe gives me a bunch of different options, and then I can sort of figure it out later what exactly I'm going to do. And so that's what I went down and did that for my first year. And my freshman year, I had these music theory classes that were just fascinating to me. And I was encountering all this music that I had never heard before in high school, in band and in the other ensembles I was in. And so just really captivated me. And I was really drawn to thinking more about composing at that time. And I had been doing a little in high school, but not too much. And just really, really started to really have an interest in that. And so I decided to switch to composition after my first year.
So Steve, the University of Miami, the Frost School is really notable in the band world. There's been terrific graduates out of that school and wonderful faculty, but of course, Alfred Reed was there, Clifton Williams.
There's been a lot of wonderful faculty there historically in that wind band tradition. From Henry Fillmore and Fred Fennell being involved for a little while, Gary Green, who was there when I studied. So there's been leadership in that area that's been, really amazing. And I think, composers as well. So, I think for me, it was a great size of a program. It was a relatively small composition program. and had some fantastic teachers. Scott Stinson was a big influence on me. One of my composition teachers there, and Dennis Cam, another one. So I think it was a nice size, and it feels like a relatively small school within a bigger university. And I think there's, for a composer, of course you want to be around just great musicians and great performers who can perform your music and record your music. And the Frost School definitely has that. And, has a great jazz program, just has a great diversity, music engineering program. So there's a lot of different programs and the musicians of all different interests studying there. So I think that sort of creates a melting pot, and, things are at a high level, and it just, is an exciting place to be.
How about after Miami? You mentioned that you were captivated by the theory and then you started to compose. How much did you compose there? And then what was the next step?
Yeah, I mean, at Miami, I was really sort of learning the craft, and learning orchestration. And, because I think back to when I was in high school, I wrote my first few pieces like for a brass ensemble because my brother played the trumpet. He was 2 years older than me. And so I sort of knew some about the trumpet because of that. And, but, in high school, the thought of writing a piece for, band was impossible to me because I just didn't know about a lot of other instruments. So I think at Miami, it was really, for me, the focus was, learning craft of all these instruments and how to write for these instruments, and being exposed to all this music, like I said, that I'd never heard before, and encountering Renaissance choral music and things like that, and just being blown away. And I joined a choir I think junior year for a year because I thought, choral music just really blew me away, and I thought I'd love to try to write this kind of music sometime. So maybe I should join a choir and figure out, from the inside how this happens. So I wrote, a bunch of chamber music and things. I wrote an orchestra piece there. And when I finished at Miami, I started talking with Gary Green about the idea of writing a wind ensemble piece. And so it wasn't until then I came to Eastman and met Mark Scatterday, the conductor of the Eastman Wind Ensemble, that I wrote my first wind ensemble piece. It was sort of for both of them, for Gary Green and Mark Scatterday. So and that sort of marked the beginning of, a new chapter, I think, in my composition career, thinking that, yeah, this makes sense. I've sat in these, groups, for years and played saxophone and been listening to all the sounds in these groups. And, I hadn't really planned on, writing wind ensemble music per se. But once I did, I just felt like, yeah, this makes sense.
So you mentioned a couple of names there, Gary Green and Mark Scatterday. They were kind of giving you some support as a composer, and that's important support. And so can you talk a little bit about that idea of a composer finding a band director or a teacher who can kind of be their champion of their music and get them off the ground?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, it's so huge, I think, for all of us as composers to have conductors and performers who believe in your music and want to help share it. And I think for me, yeah, those two people in particular, Gary Green and Mark Scatterday, both, were very open to me writing music for their groups and being gracious about giving me time to have stuff read with their groups and then performed, and just nurturing that opportunity for a young composer is just absolutely huge. And then to go beyond that and after I've written something, to then share that with other conductors, or to mention my name to other people. I think that was something that they both have done. And so I'm eternally grateful for them for doing that. And I think, yeah, every composer, hopes that there'll be people like that to support them and to help get the word out, because we know for sure in music that, connections, it's such a people business, and so much is done word of mouth, just people talking to each other, and hearing music too, at conferences and concerts and things, but so much is just talking to each other. So yeah, those personal connections are just so wonderful and so important.
Yeah. So if anyone's listening who wants to adopt a composer, I might be available. No, I've had my champions over the years, and I can't thank them enough, for what they've done for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you went to Eastman, got your master's degree. You're writing music, a lot of band music. What's the first piece of yours that sort of, I don't want to say hits, but I do want to say hits. What's the first one that kind of takes off a little bit?
Yeah, I think that would be Magnolia Star, which I wrote in 2012. So 2 years after I finished my master's degree. And again, that was a piece that I had this idea of writing a piece about the blues scale. And so it wasn't a commission. It was just a piece I wrote for myself. And as you know, when you're a composer, sometimes, you want to write a piece that you want to write, and you do that. But the only sort of downside of that sometimes is it can take a while for then it to get out in the world. And so because there wasn't a performance at the end of this process of writing the piece. And so I wrote the piece, and I, sent it to a few friends, I think, and I submitted it to a couple of competitions. And, long story short, it was like 2 years before it got performed. And, a judge in a competition called me and said they liked the piece and wanted to perform it. And then I think a friend of mine here in Rochester, Jared Chase, who teaches at Nazareth College, was one of the first handful of people that then also performed it. And so then it started to sort of get in people's ears. People heard it, and other conductors found out about it, started performing the piece a little bit. And, I feel really fortunate that it got a bunch of performances. And I think that piece helped me a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, that's the first piece that I was familiar with when I first heard your name. What does a title refer to? I never asked you that.
Yeah. So when I started playing around with the blues scale in the context of writing a wind ensemble piece, I sat at the piano and was like playing the blues scale like in clusters and just adding some different textures and rhythms. And as I was playing around with those notes, I felt like what I started to hear were sounds that reminded me of like trains. And so then I thought, okay, I had a grandfather that worked on the railroad, and, that could be cool, like blues scale plus trains. And that could be what the piece is about. And so I did a little bit of research trying to see if, maybe there could be some connection between like jazz and blues and trains. And I found out that there were numerous trains that ran from New Orleans to Chicago in the early mid 20th century. And so I sort of pictured, there could be jazz musicians going between those two cities. Of course, New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz, and then Chicago, which became also a big center for jazz. So jazz musicians riding these trains, scat singing, and so I thought, yeah, this could be a thing. And one of those trains was named the Magnolia Star.
All right, Steve. So you had a hit with Magnolia Star. Your name's out there. A few years ago, you had the opportunity to write a piece about the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Now, I know that you actually attended Sandy Hook Elementary School. Can you kind of walk us through that project?
Yeah, it was, I did go to elementary school there for 3 years, and, I grew up a mile down the road from the school. And so when that tragedy happened, it was surreal, I think, for anyone that grew up there or lived there. And, I thought being a composer, one way for me to respond to this event was, of course, to write a piece of music, but I didn't feel like I could write something, right after it happened. And, I wanted to kind of take some time before I did it. And so, 5 years later, I started to feel like, maybe I was ready to write a piece about it. And Jared Chase, who I mentioned at Nazareth College, was invited to perform at the CBDNA Eastern Division Conference in 2017, I think it was. And it was going to be at Yale University in Connecticut. And he asked me to, consider writing a piece for the conference. And so I thought, given that it's going to be in Connecticut, the premiere would be there, maybe this is the right time. And so I decided to write the piece, and it was, an incredibly hard piece to write, because I was thinking a lot about the families of these children who were lost. And, I would just sit down to try to come up with ideas and think, how am I going to write a piece of music that's going to, be good enough for this, or that's going to say something for these people. So that was challenging. I think, in the end, I just kind of got to the end, and as as a composer, you're just kind of polishing, tweaking and trying to sort of find the end of it. And I just had to, at some point, let it go and say, I hope that this is good enough. I hope it resonates with people, and I, put it out there, but I'm happy with the music that I wrote. And, it's not a piece that I enjoy listening to, because it's heavy, it's hard. But I'm proud of the music, I think.
It's really hard to write something like this. And I mean, especially for the magnitude of that particular tragedy. Have you been in contact with any of the families?
I haven't. I wrote the piece, and I don't know any of them personally, but we put things out on Facebook, and we made a video about the project. And I did have a friend of mine from growing up who was teaching in the school at that time, and fortunately it was okay. And she reached out to me. She saw the video and said that she would share with, her other colleagues and friends from San Diego Elementary. So, it's entirely possible, some of the folks there have seen the video or a performance, but I, haven't spoken with them personally.
Yeah. So what's the response been to that piece?
I mean, I think the response has been, that it has certainly resonated with a lot of people, which I'm grateful for. I'm grateful that sort of the message of the piece, has been moving people, which I think the message is sort of just remember these children, these families, this tragedy, and not let us sort of forget that it happened. And so I think, it's resonated with people. And like I said, it's a hard piece to I think to experience in a way as an audience member. And I know from a programming perspective, a lot of people have asked me, what do you recommend that I, put on the concert after this? Because it's hard, you're leaving the audience in a place that I think the end of the piece is hopeful, but it's a tough experience. So it's like, how do you follow that? What do you do then? But I think, for me, it's been really uplifting to see the way that students have responded to the piece, and I've got to work with a lot of groups on the piece, and just the way that the students have embraced it, and how it's sort of reached them and moved them, and that, the music has touched them, or that the concept behind the piece, or this issue of, gun violence in schools, that's important. It's just, there's a number of ways that I think the students have engaged with the piece. And so that's been, really uplifting for me to see.
So Steve, you're on the Everything Band podcast, but I know that as a composer, you're a little bit more, you work in more genres other than band. So can you talk a little bit about your other composition?
Yeah, I mean, I do like to write for other genres because I feel like it keeps me fresh as a composer. So just like I'd like to listen to a lot of different kinds of music and go to concerts that have, a variety of music. When I sit down to write, I also find that, if I write a piece for band, and then the next piece I write, I kind of want to write something different so that when I come back and write another band piece, I'm bringing the tools to write for something else back to writing for band. So like if I go and write a choral piece or an art song, then I come back to the band score fresh and I'm thinking about things a little bit differently. And I feel like that helps me. So yeah, I guess ever since college, I've just grown more and more interested in writing for the voice. And so I've written a couple of art song cycles in the past few years. And I've really enjoyed that because I think with the text, it gives you this whole other element to work with. And so I think, and I've experimented with that in wind band compositions too. I mean, with Into the Silent Land, there's a poem that's spoken at the end. So there's not a singing element, but it's still including that text in a way. And so I've written some choral music that uses text and, art songs I think are interesting to me because, you take a poem, you take this text, and for me, I try to sort of almost score the poem like a film score. Like I picture, what is this poem saying? What is it? What's the scene it's painting? And then I try to sort of paint that in music to complement what the text is doing. And so it's just composing in a little bit of a different way in thinking about sort of scoring. And I really like that. It's really creative and fulfilling for me. And so, it just sort of cross pollinates, because then again, when I come back to writing a band piece, I might think about, I wonder if there's some scene that I can picture in my head that would like help me, write this piece.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of similarities between writing for voice and writing for winds. Obviously, you have the whole breathing issue, and then you have sort of the singing issue too. I mean, to me, wind instruments work best when they're thought of almost as like singing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, some of the most impactful wind music is that lyrical voice like music. Like Irish Tune. From County Dairy, which just had a huge impact on me as a high school player because it had that sort of vocal quality to it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's based on a folk song that has words. And so I guess the question I should ask is, does text ever inspire you to write band music, or do you ever use the text as more than inspiration other than what you use the poem in at the end of Into the Silent Land?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely, like in the case of Into the Silent Land, used text to help inspire the piece. And so a lot of times when I start a piece, when I'm trying to figure out, what it's about or where it's going to go, I seek out some poetry to help just bring in another creative element and inspire some music. And so that was, in the case of Into the Silent Land, I was grappling with, how do I write this music? How do I approach this? And I found this poem by Christina Rossetti titled Remember. And it really spoke to me like, this is what the music should be about. And I think that helped me to sort of have that poem to just in my mind to be thinking about and help me generate musical ideas. So, I haven't used it in a wind band setting, in the way of using it, with a vocalist. I've done that in like chamber winds. I've done that, but I think as a composer, you're always exploring new things too, and being interested in new ideas. And so I fully expect that, I may do that in the future.
Yeah, I'll often have a phrase from a poem or a line when I'm working on a piece, just to sort of kind of keep me focused on what it is my ideas are.
Yeah, actually, it reminds me. I have a little, I have like a sticky note on my desk right now that's fairly recent, because I was reading a book a few months ago about the life of and work of Fred Rogers, and I just remember one of the things in the book that he was obviously well known for just his pacing of speaking and how much he listened. And so silence was really, really important to him because it allowed him, in the silence, he would speak and then leave silence. And he felt like that was giving people and children the time to absorb what he was saying. And it made me think, silence is so important in music, because it does the same thing. It gives us the time to reflect on what we just heard, but it's easy as a composer to forget about silence and how powerful it is. So I've got a sticky note on my desk that just says silence.
It's a good one. It's a really good idea, because it's those, the patterning of rhythm is about sound and silence. It's not just about sound.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, right.
Yeah. Now you have me thinking about Fred Rogers and the way he sang, "Won't you be my neighbor?" with that long silence in there.
Yeah.
Someone with perfect pitch is like, "You sang it in the wrong key." Anyway. All right, Steve. So, how about your publishing? I know that you're self-published. What led you to that decision?
Yeah, I self-published all of my wind band music and chamber music and things. I do publish with traditional publishers, some choral music and percussion music, because what I found was that, after Eastman, after graduate school, I had a lot of friends who at Miami were conductors studying with Gary Green, who went off and got college teaching jobs, high school teaching jobs, and conductor friends from Eastman did the same thing. And so I had this network of, conductors and performers who I knew, and they were, comfortable just reaching right out to me and asking about music and purchasing music. And so I just sort of, fell into, I can do this myself, and I have a website and, I can do it. But I think for the other communities like choral, percussion, I mentioned, I'm not as much in those communities. And so I think having a publisher there does help, connect you with communities that you're maybe not as much a part of. But yeah, I enjoy self-publishing, and, I enjoy the sort of business side of it to a certain extent. And so I think, that's a fun part. I think, a composer who wants to be self-published has to be a little bit interested in, managing the business side, because that's part of it and it takes time. But I've had some great, friends and colleagues to learn from. And, I think of Sean Murphy Music Press, good friend of mine. And so, we've worked together for years, and he distributes my music. So, people can get it through him. J.W. Pepper, I was able to get a relationship with years ago. And so they distribute my music as well. So there's ways to get it, beyond just me, any retailer, also local retailer can get my music through me. So, self-publishing is not only, I think, just it's working with other people too. But I think, as a composer, there's definitely some benefits. And I think, to me, I think one of the great benefits of self-publishing is just being able to interact with the customer more, so when people purchase something from me, it's like we can email or talk on the phone and, meet each other that way, versus if they order through, J.W. Pepper or retailer, which is totally fine. And I know, sometimes that's how they need to do it. But then it's like we don't have that personal connection, because I don't know who's ordering through those retailers. So, self-publishing does provide that connection, which is pretty neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting choice that composers face when they decide whether to self-publish or to go with the traditional route. And it's interesting that you have your choral music with the traditional publishers. Do you think you have maybe had more of a reach in the band world, or is it just the grade level makes it better to self-publish? Do you have any thoughts on that, or is it just the decision you made?
I think like you said, the reach, I think I have more reach in the wind band community because I'm, of that community in a sense, being a saxophonist, and having a lot of friends who again were conductors and performers in that community. So I was able to sort of establish myself there and write music and sort of get it out. And like we talked about, having champions, Mark Scatterday, Gary Green, those people, help you get the music out. So I think I was able to get reach within the band community, and in the choral community, me less so, not coming up through the choral ranks. And, I've been commissioned to write choral music, but not as much as band music. So a lot of the choral music I've written is just music that I've wanted to write. And then again, so it's like, then what do you do with it? So I thought, I'll send this to a publisher, and if they publish it, maybe, something can happen with it. And so that's been more my approach on the choral side.
Mm-hmm. So just out of curiosity, what's it like? I've never written a choral piece, and it's something I want to do. I'd love to do more of it, starting with one. But what's the difference? I mean, how is it, as a composer, do you feel when you write a choral piece versus a band piece? Is there much of a difference?
The big difference is the text, but I think musically, for me, when I sit down to write a piece of music, in a sense, it doesn't matter what forces it's for or what grade level it's for. Ultimately my goal is to write the best piece of music that I can, that has musical depth and meaning and is well crafted and it's idiomatic for whatever I'm writing for. So like those are the things that I'm thinking about the most in a sense. And I think with choral music, it's the same as writing for a band, but I think that text is the big piece, because you really start with that as, the focus in the beginning of, okay, I need to set these words in a way that makes sense and is natural. And just like you'd write phrases for an instrument that are idiomatic, you want to write phrases for a vocalist that are idiomatic, with text declamation and, the right syllables on the right notes and lengths. And so there's that focus on the text and sort of representing the text well that I think really makes it different. And I think it can be a really enjoyable process, because again, you have that sort of limitation that the text gives you, which is a good thing, and provides you that structure to work within. So it can be actually a helpful, tool for creativity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, Steve, how about if someone wanted to commission a work for you? What sort of tips or advice would you have for them?
I think whenever you're thinking about commissioning any composer, that I think, planning out well ahead of time is really important. A lot of composers are thinking, planning a year out or so. Obviously the level of the composer plays into that, but for me, I'm usually trying to think out 6 months to a year or so. So approaching the composer early, a year before you want to have the music is great, to just start having the conversations and, here's the project that I'm thinking about. Are you interested? Having those conversations early is important. I think, for me, I like to think of it as a collaboration, so I like to, really write a piece that's going to really resonate with, is this a particular project, or is this piece for a particular purpose? and just make sure this is really going to resonate with the performers and the conductor. And I really like the process of workshopping a piece. So if there's a way for us to work on the piece, even just a little, while the piece is still in process, then there can be great collaboration, because I can prepare part of the piece, the performers can play it, maybe record it or something if we're a ways away and we have to do it virtually. And then the performers really have like part of that process. They have some ownership, because, I'll like listen to that and then come back and maybe tweak things, and they'll get to be part of that creative process. And I found that that's, really wonderful for me and for the performers. So, I think that's a part of it that I love. And then I think also thinking about, with any composer, just ways to build in that kind of time between the students and the composer during the process or in the rehearsal process, at the end, just giving the students and the composer the opportunity to be together. I think it's great, because, I think, in our music education, sometimes we think of composers as being people that, are dead and gone, right? And we can't talk to them, we can't ask them questions. And of course, there's lots of composers. You and I are two of them that are out here writing music, and that we can talk to people and answer questions. And so I think that's a great thing to consider when you're putting together a commission.
So Steve, I know that I have some listeners here who are composers, and maybe some band directors or music teachers who are thinking about composing. Do you have any sort of general advice if someone wants to dip their toes in the water?
I mean, I think the first thing I would say is, to just do it. If you're thinking about getting started, that's kind of what I did in high school, was just, I'm sitting in band and hearing the horns hit this note that clashes with what I'm playing, but it sounds really cool. And, how do I recreate that? And so I think, you don't need permission to experiment and write music. And you don't need a teacher right away. I think that's great to get there and learn the craft. But I think that's my first sort of piece of advice is, to just go for it and get started. I think down the road, I think one of the most important things for a composer is just to really expose yourself to as much music as you can, and sort of be open to hearing different kinds of music that you aren't familiar with, and going to concerts and just listening to music. And even if it's something that, you don't like, you're listening to a piece and you're like, I just don't like this. I always sort of challenge myself in that situation to like really take it in, and then take away something positive from it. What's something that I did like? Maybe I didn't like everything in the piece, but what can I learn from it? What did I like about it? There was this moment with the timpani and the trombone, they did this thing, and that was really cool, And so I think just, learning from music by listening to it, for me is huge. Certainly, studying scores and things like that too, but just exposing yourself to a lot of music, because composers, we have to sort of build this toolbox of techniques of orchestration that we know, like, again, timpani and trombone, like, doing this particular figure, like that's a cool effect. I'm going to, put that away in my brain from my toolbox to pull out if I need it. So to build that toolbox, we really have to, listen to a lot of music.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Ann Molesky, and I'm the host of the Anna Krusik Podcast, another podcast in the Muted Network. It's my mission to help music teachers be more purposeful, sequential, and joyful in each and everything they do as teacher musicians. Join me every Thursday as I share tips, tricks, and meaningful conversations with other music teachers about how to make the general music classroom more intentional and impactful for both you and your students.
Steve, let's move on to the final questions. These are questions I ask of everyone, and they're broad. And they're meant to be. And so the first of these is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
Yeah, I think, competition, there is, like you're saying, there's a good side to it. There's a benefit in some cases. And I think, there's this saying of, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I think, having competition that is part of what we do, that sort of just makes everyone a little bit better, I think can be okay. I think the problem is when the competition becomes like the focus of what we do, and instead of not the focus, and we're really thinking about the competition as the main thing instead of, not the main thing. So then I think that becomes unhealthy.
Musicians tend to live a passionate life because they love their work, or at least their work is a part of their identity. But how have you found a work-life balance in your life as a musician?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think, it's something that takes time. I've found, at least for me, that it's taken me a lot of time to get to the point where I feel like I have a good life-work balance. Because like you're saying, music is such a part of our identity as a composer, as a musician, a performer, conductor. It's really more than just a job or a work, that we do. It's so important to us that it's easy to let it, take over more of our lives. And especially early on, we're hustling, trying to build a career, and so I think that's understandable. But I think, you want to prioritize other things for sure. And I think, often taking time away from those creative pursuits actually makes, when you come back to it, you're more productive, you're better at it. So, I've had to sort of figure that out for myself. But, for me, it's like I prioritize things like going for walks a lot, going for hikes. I do a lot of cooking. I have my wife Ashley and our dog. We spend a lot of time together outside and things. So, again, I think it's taken me a lot of time to get to that point where, I don't really work on the weekends most of the time unless I have something pressing. So you set up some boundaries for yourself that work for you, and they're going to be different for everyone. But, for me, it's like, there was a time early in my career when I worked on the weekends some, because, I was like, well, what else am I going to do right now? And I, would work more at night, after dinner, go back to work for a little while. Now it's like, I don't really go back to work much at night. I don't really work on the weekends. I go hiking and do that other kind of stuff. So, I think prioritizing that, setting up some boundaries for yourself is important, but again, know that it takes time, and, don't be too hard on yourself.
So Steve, this is a question that, is a big question, and everyone answers it from their own perspective. But what are the challenges that are facing music education or band, and how do you think we meet those challenges?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think, for me, one of the things that, resonates with me personally is, music education programs that, are being cut or, defunded. That fourth grade orchestra that I mentioned when I grew up and played the violin for a year, that was cut at some point. And so there's no longer fourth grade orchestra. So it's not just something people talk about. It really happens. And, I think that's, for me, someone who cares that much about music as much as I do, it's hard to see that happen because I know, how much music can impact people's lives. And, so, I think for me, it's like, I try to just do the best work I possibly can and try to advocate for music and the arts and educate people and try to inspire people, and promote inspiring teachers. recognized teachers that I've had that have, been crucial in my life, and, to try to just keep those music education programs going for the future so that, our students are experiencing those things. And I know this also makes me think of something that I know that we've talked about that you've mentioned, which I think is another great issue to bring up, which is sort of that our music education programs aren't always reaching all the students in the school, right? And I think that's another obstacle that we face is, how do we do that? Engage students who are interested in music, but maybe not these traditional ensembles that we have. What can we offer them to bring them in too?
Yeah, no, that's something I talk about a lot. It's the idea, the research shows that about 80% of the student body or only about 20% participates in the traditional ensembles, band, choir, orchestra. And then, so there's 80% of the school that doesn't participate in music, except a lot of those kids do make music. And
Right.
So what are we doing as music teachers, not just the choir teacher, not just the band teacher, not just the orchestra director? What are we doing to reach those kids? Are we offering guitar classes? Are we offering music appreciation? Or what I think we should be doing, which is offering music technology courses? We have all these online tools that are free, Soundtrap, etc. You just need a laptop and some headphones and you could, start making music. And so, I just think that that's something that we have to embrace more in the band community.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to tell you the stat is 20% that they were reaching. That's amazing. I would have thought that it was much higher than that.
Yeah. And it also, as we all know, as band directors, we've all had that student, if you've taught high school, you've had that student come to you as a sophomore saying, hey, I'd like to be in the band, and they don't play anything. And so you give them, you teach them an instrument the best you can. And, there's a high barrier for entry to an ensemble by the time they get to high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of issues around it. And, it's something that I think we need to be better at, but that's my thing. All right. So, Steve, I have just invented a time machine and I'm going to take you back to your high school graduation. What are you going to tell yourself?
I think, don't be in a hurry. I think those years, college and after, early in your career, like I said, it's easy to hustle a lot in that time and be sort of anxious to get to the next place in your life. But I think I would say, don't be in a rush. Don't hurry. Don't worry too much. Just try to live more in the moment.
All right, Steve, if you could plan it out, what would be the final work that you'd want to listen to or perform or conduct or be involved with in some way?
I think, two come to mind. I think it's hard to narrow this down. I can think of, there's like 5 or 6 different pieces of music that, are important to me. I mean, I'm sure there's more, but, a couple that I think of really strong emotional ties. I mentioned Irish Tune from County Derry. I think that's a piece that when I was a senior in high school, I had the opportunity to play with my all-state band in Connecticut, which was conducted by Glenn Adsett, which was great. And, just the sound of all those players, 8 tubas and 10 euphoniums, whatever it was, the warmth of that sound, the lyricism, the beauty of it, just really, bowled me over. And I'll never forget that feeling of playing that. So I think that's a piece that, helps continue to lead me, inspire me into a life in music. And then, being someone who likes to write for bands, it's something that I still think about a lot. So, and one of my grandfathers loved Danny Boy. So there's that too. I think the other one I think of too, totally different, but Arvo Pärt's piece, Spiegel, which is a piece for violin and piano, which is just this really ethereal piece that's very, very simple. And one of my composition teachers at Eastman, Carlos Sanchez Gutierrez, introduced me to the piece and played it for me in a lesson. It was just like, wow, I mean, it's so simple, so beautiful, just that's all. It's just simple, beautiful music that has a lot of space in it. And I think, sometimes in music, we get caught up in a lot of complications, complex music, and it's just beautiful, simple music.
So how about a piece of yours? If someone doesn't know your music and is just listening to this interview, what would you want them to listen to get a good sense of who you are as a composer?
Yeah, I mean, there's a piece of mine that I like called Alcott Songs, and it's a piece for soprano and piano. It's one of my song cycles that I wrote a few years ago, and I made a version for soprano and chamber winds as well. And it's a set of short songs. They're like 1 minute to 3-4 minutes, and they each just have sort of a different character, and they're whimsical. Some of them are funny, and then at the end there's a lullaby, which is sort of like the arbo Pärt I was just describing, sort of just simple, beautiful music. And so I think in the course of that piece, of that song cycle, you can get a sense of, the different parts of my voice that I think as a composer that I have, and the different textures and harmonies that I like to write with. And so I think it gives you a sense of who I am as a composer.
So this is a strange question in the middle of a pandemic, but is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Yeah, I think, as with all composers right now, we've all had things postponed and put off, and we're sort of pivoting a little bit, writing things that we didn't know we were going to write, a year or two ago. But so I don't have any, big premieres coming up. I think maybe this summer, we'll start seeing some more live music come back. But I'll just mention a piece that I just finished fairly recently called Canon Fanfare, which is a 2-minute fanfare. And in the time of the pandemic, like you said, we've been writing a lot of flex music for flexible instrumentation. And so this is a piece that I actually wrote for, it's available for flexible instrumentation, for band, for orchestra, or string orchestra. So I made 4 versions of the piece, which I've never done before, but I just felt like, yeah, it's a piece that could work for all these different ensembles. And so why not make it available? Because there's just people in all different kinds of situations right now in terms of how many people they can have in their ensembles and what those ensembles look like. So the more options we can give people, the better. So it's just a 2-minute fanfare that it's called Canon Fanfare because there's a canon in the middle. And then there's a sort of beginning and end that's more fanfare like. And I had a great time writing it. And so I hope people enjoy it.
All right, Steve, how can people get in touch with you?
My website is just my name, stevedanyew.com. And my email is steve@stevedanyew.com. And you can reach me on social media and reach out anytime. Love to hear from you.
Excellent, Steve. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.